right, and it is 1 o'clock, so we will go ahead and get started now. So I'm delighted to welcome you all to the Grow Your Own with Square Foot Gardening webinar with the Square Foot Gardening Foundation. Before we get started, I have a few housekeeping items I would like to go over with you. If you're joining us from inside the Zoom room, you will have the best viewing experience if you click the full screen mode on the top right-hand corner of your screen. We will have a live Q&A portion towards the end of the webinar where you can ask general questions about creating a square foot garden, but we do ask that you please refrain from asking geographic or backyard specific questions. And for those of you who are joining us via Zoom, you can ask your questions directly in the Zoom chat window. And for those of you on Facebook Live, you can ask your questions in the comments section. And if we do not get to all of your questions, please email info@plantpurecommunities.org. And also you can find this recording posted after the webinar on our PPC YouTube page by going to our website and clicking on past PPC events. And lastly, you can learn about the latest plant-based news and updates about PPC by following the PlantPure Communities Facebook page. And with that, I will turn it over to Caroline.
Thank you. Hello, everybody. Again, we're delighted to welcome you to this webinar focused on growing your own with Square Foot Gardening method. My name is Caroline Dyer, and I'm the Vice President of PlantPure Communities. I'm joined by two of our staff members, Jessie, who you've just met, and Ella, who will introduce herself in a moment. We're also joined by our presenter, Kim Roman from the Square Foot Gardening Foundation. This is our third year partnering with the Square Foot Gardening Foundation on a webinar, and we're so grateful for the opportunity to get to work together to introduce you to this gardening method. I'll start with a brief intro for those who are new to PlantPure Communities. PlantPure Communities is a 501c3 nonprofit organization founded by Nelson Campbell, director of the 2015 documentary film PlantPure Nation, which you can watch for free anytime on YouTube. Our mission is to build stronger, healthier, and more sustainable communities by sharing the evidence-based nutrition science of Dr. T. Colin Campbell, author of the China Study, which demonstrates that optimal health may be achieved through a whole food, plant-based diet. When people learn how powerful nutrition can be, they are better able to make informed decisions about their own health. PPC works with hundreds of communities across the United States and abroad via the POD network. PODs are independent local groups that provide a supportive, inclusive environment for people who are interested in transitioning to plant-based nutrition, a plant-based lifestyle, and for those who are already living this lifestyle. The number of people engaged with the PODs is always growing, with close to 250,000 people participating. Anybody and everybody is welcome. You can find out if there's a pod in your community by visiting our website, plantpurecommunities.org. We welcome you to join or start a pod to help build this grassroots movement. We also have toolkits on the website, which were created in an effort to support the pods in doing whatever they want to do, which is meaningful to their community, whether it's organizing a veg fest, changing restaurant options, transitioning to a whole food plant-based diet, planting a community garden, and more. I'll hand things off to Ella now so we can focus on today's topic.
Thank you, Caroline. Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining us. I'm Ella Stevens, and I am the Pod Support Programs Manager at PlantPure Communities. I worked closely with the Square Foot Gardening Foundation in 2018, 2019, and now again in 2020 to encourage more pods and pod members to grow their own food and to help others eat more plant-based. We are very grateful for their support and for Jim Courage, who is on the PPC Board of Directors, for creating this partnership. It has been a lovely experience working with Laura and Steve Bartholomew and the rest of the Square Foot Gardening Foundation as we explore the synergy between our organizations. We are excited for this collaboration to continue to grow and impact people's and communities' lives. And now I'd like to draw your attention to the updated gardening toolkit on PPC's website. This toolkit is filled with info sheets to share basic information about square foot gardening, action sheets to help you take gardening action like a community garden in your neighborhood or backyard, handouts from the Square Foot Gardening Foundation, and a PowerPoint for group leaders to present this information to their pod members and greater communities. For this webinar, we have created a resource sheet with helpful links and information about community gardens and materials you will need to get started. We will share that link in the chat during Kim's presentation. Just quickly, an important note regarding this webinar and the materials in the toolkit. What is provided is a general overview about the Square Foot Gardening method to get you started. We welcome you to post your questions along the way in Zoom or on Facebook for the Q&A session. For all the details, we do suggest getting a copy of the all-new Square Foot Gardening book, the 3rd edition. You will see and hear more about this book a little later, but for now, I will pass it over to Kim Roman, a certified gardening instructor and our presenter today from the Square Foot Gardening Foundation.
So hello everyone. Again, my name is Kim Roman, and I'm a Square Foot Gardening certified instructor and an ambassador, and I am very proud to represent the Square Foot Gardening Foundation today. So I've been a certified instructor since 2010, when I learned directly from Mel Bartholomew, who is the author and creator of this great garden method. First today, I'll talk a little bit about the foundation, and then I'll give a brief overview of the Square Foot Gardening method. And finally, I'll discuss using how to use Square Foot Gardening in a community garden setting. We'll touch on planning and implementing the garden and give you some helpful hints and tips. Don't forget to check out that handy resource page, and there will be even more hints and links provided there than I'll be able to cover today. So let's start with the Square Foot Gardening Foundation. And this is Mel Bartholomew, and he, of course, established the method, but he also established the foundation around 1996, and it really was started out to be designed to help educators teach children how to square foot garden. Well, that program was aptly called the Square Yard in a Schoolyard, because 3 feet by 3 feet is the perfect size raised bed for children. At one time, there was a square foot garden in each and every elementary school in the state of Utah. And soon Mel expanded the program to create square meter gardening and adapt it for use in the rest of the world. I think America is probably the only one that does not use the metric system. So I'd like to read a quote from the all-new Square Foot Gardening 3rd edition book, and we're providing the link for you in the chat. So until the day he passed away, Mel Bartholomew championed the potential for square foot gardening to be more than just the best, most efficient way to grow a home garden. Mel always dreamed big, and he fully believed that the incredible efficiency of the square foot gardening method had the potential to solve the world hunger issue. Well, if you're going to dream, you might as well dream big, and Mel certainly did that. And he loved that with square foot gardening, people could become more self-sufficient, and they'd be able to provide themselves with access to more reasonably priced and nutritious organic produce. And it was a way also to give each of us a method to help reduce our carbon footprint. So that sounds great to me. So Mel also, through the foundation, began the Certified Instructor Program. And this was to train people how to teach square foot gardening or square meter gardening in their own communities, and to take square meter gardening around the world. I had the privilege actually of teaching square foot gardening in Kenya in 2018. So before we start our quick overview of the square foot gardening method, let me give you a little brief history. It surprises people that Mel was not a horticulturist. He was not a master gardener. He was a civil engineer and an efficiency expert. Now, I truly believe that sometimes it takes an outsider to create something that's truly innovative. And that he did. In the mid-1970s, Mel retired from his job. He sold his civil engineering business and he took up gardening. And he soon realized that home gardeners were basically just mimicking a farm when they used the row gardening method. Large areas had to be rototilled and heavily amended. A thin row of crops was formed, but you needed to have 3 feet in between those 2 tiny rows of vegetables. And the reason for that was so you could stand there and hoe the weeds. So he set about fixing everything he hated about row gardening and its tremendous waste of valuable time and resources. So let's get into the method and you'll see why it's also great for using in community gardens. In its simplest form, you find a flat piece of ground, you build a simple bottomless raised bed with just 4 pieces of lumber and some galvanized screws to hold it together. Place it on top of a layer of heavy-duty weed cloth, which is also called landscape fabric. And next you're going to fill that raised bed with Mel's mix, and that's the wonderful growing medium that we'll talk about in a bit. Then you're going to lay a prominent and permanent grid on top of that Mel's mix. It can be bamboo poles, lathing strips, screen molding, and believe it or not, even old Venetian blinds that you can pick up at a thrift store. So please don't use nails and string, especially if you're going to create a community garden. String tends to sink into the ground and down into that Mel's mix when it gets wet, whether you're watering it or rain. Then it starts to decompose and really easily break. So that's just not a good, it's just not a good thing to use for the grid. Plus, you know, scraping your arm across a nail, that's just tends to ruin your day. And let's see. Oh, why is that grid important? Why? That's a really good question that we get all the time. I don't get it. Why should we have a grid? Well, I know it sounds silly, but when we show someone a 4-foot by 4-foot raised bed and we ask them, how many crops do you think you could grow in there? Let me hold on just a second. I know I've got the slide on, but so here's a representative of a 4-by-4 raised bed. And a lot of the time people say, I think I can grow 4 crops in there. Some will say, I bet I could jam like 9 crops in there. You just have no concept of how much you can grow in that tiny space. All right. So with that grid, you instantly see that you can grow up to 16 different vegetables, herbs, and flowers in that tiny space. And by the way, your raised bed does not have to be 4 feet by 4 feet. 4-by-4 was chosen for 2 reasons. First of all, if you have access all the way around that raised bed, most people can comfortably reach in 2 feet to work on the center of that raised bed. So for instance, my personal square foot garden is 2 feet by 23 feet because it's along a fence line. And I could not make it, of course, 4 feet because I couldn't reach in all the way to work in the very back where the fence is, or if you have it near your house. So if you're petite or gardening with children, instead of a 4-by-4, you really probably want a 3-foot by 3-foot. And that works great with metric because it's 1 meter basically. So the second reason for Mel choosing 4-by-4 is that here in the States, lumber is most commonly sold in 8-foot lengths. So that requires just 1 cut. There's that efficiency expert in Mel. So again, those working with the metric system, a 1 meter wide garden can be maybe 1 meter long, 2 or 3 meters long, and that 1 meter wide. And that's just perfect. So the squares, of course, are going to be a little bit larger than a square foot, but that's fine. It doesn't have to be precise. But what we do want precise is your planting. So you're going to plant your garden, and we very precisely put just 2 or 3 seeds, a little pinch, into each planting hole. Gone are the days when you're going to rip open that lettuce packet and sprinkle all the seeds on top of that area, only to rip out most of them. You know, lettuce needs to be 6 inches apart, so you have to leave just four little leaf lettuces in a single square. So that saves you a lot of valuable time. And if all 3 of those seeds happen to pop up, you're just going to take and cut the 2 weakest ones, and that will leave just 1 strong plant per planting hole. So I get a lot of people say, oh, I don't want to tear out that nice little cute little plant. Go ahead and do it. You're going to eat it when it's mature anyway, so why not? And guess what? At that small stage, that's a microgreen. Do you know how much you pay for microgreens? Go ahead and enjoy it. Throw those little cast-offs in your salad. So you can see that the number of plants per square is based on the thin to or final spacing directions that are on the seed packet or the plant label. So we rarely get seeds in Mel's mix, but planting precisely means that you'll be able to immediately spot a weed. Take a look at the 1 square on that slide that has the single dot in the middle of it. If something pops up in the upper right-hand corner of that square, what is it? Well, of course, it's a weed. Even if I accidentally dropped another seed there, that would crowd the square too much, and you'd want to remove it anyway. So this again saves you a lot of time, and you don't have to wait to be able to recognize it. You don't have to wait for it to grow up tall enough. So let's talk about Mel's mix. As you can see, it's composed of equal parts by volume of fluffed peat moss. You could also use cocoa coir for that. The second ingredient would be a coarse grade vermiculite. You want it nice and chunky. Medium might do okay for a little bit. Fine is not good. And the third thing for Mel's mix is a good blended compost. And that blended compost needs to have at least 5 different ingredients. Homemade is absolutely the best because it does have more than five ingredients just from your kitchen scraps, some newspaper, and always make extra compost and set it to the side, and I'll tell you why in a little bit. If you have to rely on bagged compost, check out that resource list that Ella was talking about for hints on that. All right, let me go back for a second and teach you the correct way to fill your raised bed. So you're going to put 2 inches of Mel's mix on that weed cloth, and then you're going to water it really well. It does take peat moss a little bit of time to get wet, but after that, you only need to maintain the moisture level. So then 2 more inches of Mel's mix and a lot of water, and your final 2 inches of Mel's mix and even more water. Hey, wait, Cam, are you telling me that we only need 6 inches of Mel's mix? Okay, yeah, all right, look at those great crops. 6 inches of Mel's mix. The only crops that we've found that would benefit from 8 inches of Mel's mix would be your squash and your melons. Other than that, really, honest to goodness, you can grow almost everything in 6 inches of Mel's mix. And there are some shallow-rooted veggies that only require 4 inches. Hey, but Kim, I want to grow long carrots. I can't do that in 6 inches of Mel's mix. Well, you're right. So in that case, you're just going to use the top hat. Think of it as a 1 foot by 1 foot bottomless raised bed that you place on a single square. There again, you will put in 6 inches of Mel's mix, 2 inches at a time, 2 inches water, 2 inches water, 2 inches water. So that single square is going to be 12 inches deep. And that will save you from having to buy 12-inch deep lumber, and it would save you from having to fill up the entire raised bed with 12 inches of Mel's mix. So finally, with proper planning, you're going to be able to use each square 2 to 3 times a growing season. For instance, in early spring, you're going to be able to grow 4-leaf lettuces, and then that'll be early spring, early spring, as a matter of fact, because we can protect our raised beds very easily, and I'll talk a little bit about that later. And then you will harvest those 4 spent lettuce plants, take a trowel of compost, stir it into that 1 square, and you've refreshed the nutrients. So with square foot gardening, you do not need to use additional fertilizer if you're using Mel's mix. So next you need to be ready with a pepper transplant, and that will grow through the summer. After that's done, you'll pull out that pepper plant. You will use another trowel of compost and stir it into the square, and that square is ready for your fall turnips. So every time you harvest a square, you're going to refresh it with a trowel of compost, and that's why I suggested to make extra compost at the very beginning. So now let's talk about those community gardens. Now let's see. I'm going to read another quote from Mel, and he said, "With the right leadership and strategy, a community garden offers a neighborhood a means of fostering relationships, boosting pride by creating a sense of accomplishment, and feeding many, many people. The square foot gardening method is particularly well suited to community gardens because it is easy to maintain and grows a lot of produce in a very small space." Excuse me for just a second. And again, Mel loved that gardening helps with self-sufficiency, will improve people's health because of eating more organic, nutritious vegetables, homegrown veggies, and it reduces, again, our impact on the earth. Those are some things that are very, very important to Mel. So before starting a community garden, we suggest reading and understanding the all-new Square Foot Gardening 3rd edition book. And there's a link to there on the slide, plus I believe they're going to put that in the chat, and it will be on the resource page. Before you turn that, I just looked on Amazon, and right now it's only $12.94, something like that. So it's very well worth grabbing it right now. All right. So I'm going to be talking again about the specific thing of using square foot gardening in a community garden setting. So I believe that you guys still have some resources online, recordings online, sorry, that teach the method. So people can go ahead and check with PlantPure Communities for that. So I'm not going to lie to you, it will be a challenge to organize a community garden and deal with many different people, such as government officials. So I think the first thing you need to do would be to enlist a working board, a group of like-minded people that are going to help you create the community garden. So one reason you're going to want to learn about square foot gardening ahead of time is so that you can confidently present the concept to your community leaders and others. you're going to need to be able to sell the method and sell the idea to people, because it goes against human nature. So here's a sign for St. Anthony's Park. And while one person is working on finding a location, another person should be working on the means to fund the garden. F-U-N-D, fund the garden. One of the first places to stop would probably be your local Parks and Recreation Department. And hopefully they would be able to help you find a location. So if they're hesitant to give you a dedicated space for a community garden, then ask them if you can convert a corner of an existing community garden to square foot boxes. So again, be ready to do some educating if they are not familiar with the square foot gardening method. But really, once they understand the efficiency and productivity of the method, they will definitely be more friendly to your proposal. If that doesn't work, reach out to an individual city council members, or maybe your local extension service, or one of your county agencies is the extension service, and it's going to be affiliated with a local college or university. They're usually the ones that oversee your county's master gardener programs. And really, I really think that that's a good place to find a location. And they'll be great resource to give you ideas how to get your program launched. And you might even be able to convince a few of them to help you be on that, that planning board. So maybe your municipality will devote a corner of a park or playground, or even a vacant lot as a temporary spot for square foot gardening. Don't turn down a temporary spot, because that might be, once you prove yourself, that would be your foot in the door to get a permanent location. So starting out small might help you get used to governing the program. And if it's only a temporary space, like we just talked about, then that just makes sense to do. Start out small. If you're going the government route, or if going the government route does not work, then the next thing you could do would perhaps reach out to your local school principal or a clergy member and ask to use a little bit of their land. If none of those pans out, well, maybe a local business might be willing to lend you some space on their campuses for a community garden. Again, I'd start small that way. All right, we talked about that bottomless raised bed, but one advantage to square foot gardening is that you can attach a plywood bottom to that raised bed and drill several drainage holes in it, raise them up on some bricks, and that'll turn it into a patio box. So this way, if you have to, you could use an old concrete pad or asphalt area, and that's another thing that you might be able to do. And I'd like to see them try that with row gardening. All right, so since we can use concrete or asphalt, that means that an abandoned parking lot or a cracked tennis court can actually become a vibrant and productive community garden. So after a structural engineer checks things out, even a rooftop or the top level of a parking tower could be a great place to grow food. So the next thing we're going to talk about is rules. So while one board member is seeking the funding and another is scouting locations, someone else should be working on governance and rules for the community garden. The resource list is going to contain some links where you can see how other groups have formed their community gardens. And a lot of the times they'll have their bylaws online, So it's going to save you a lot of time and money if you search online for a community garden's rules and bylaws and modify them for your specific needs. When you find a location, of course, you're going to need some documentation spelling out the and explaining, sorry, how each entity and what each will provide. You are going to be using maybe a church or a school. What are they going to provide? Then what are you going to have to provide? And you have to have a documentation and agreement between those two sources. This is before you even start the community garden. In many cases, you'll need to become a nonprofit agency, especially if you're going to be dealing with the government agencies. And in almost all cases, you're going to need to get insurance in case something gets broken or someone gets hurt. If you take the time and set up your bylaws correctly, it's going to help mitigate some of your liability. And you're also going to want to put in your documentations, whether it's your bylaws or the agreement with the organization that's going to lend you the land, there should be some way of mediating minor disputes instead of going to court. So take your time, take your time, take your time, and check and double check and get some legal advice in there. I'm going to be talking about that a couple of times. The board members, your little cadre of helpers, you guys need to meet specifically about the rules and regulations and bylaws several times before you present it to someone else. That attorney, this is where you're going to want the attorney to double check what you think is your final product for your bylaws. One of the best things you can do is to require every new member to attend an orientation meeting and to take a square foot gardening class. It's critical. If you want your community garden to be purely square foot gardening, you have to teach them. People have in their mind what a square foot garden is, but you have to give square foot gardening classes to make sure that they truly understand. So money, 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 money. You're going to have to decide how much you're going to charge people to rent one or more plots. Also, will you be charging a one-time administrative fee to process the member applications? You're going to need to provide a convenient way for people to apply for their garden plot and also to pay their fees online. But also, you're going to have to make sure that you're allowing for a less tech-savvy gardener to also be able to participate. And they're going to really want the old-fashioned way with physical documents in hand and pay by check or cash. So you have to be able to deal with any way that you can get the money from the people and make it easy for them is great. Since you're going to be dealing with money, make sure that your board has a very competent and trustworthy treasurer and provide plenty of oversight for that person. So consider making volunteer service a mandatory part or a condition for renting a plot. You need to be strict about enforcing this rule. You're going to need volunteer labor for fall and spring cleanups, for tending the compost pile. You're probably going to want to have a community compost pile there so that people can put their scraps in and get some free compost out of it. Appoint one of your volunteers as a volunteer coordinator, and they're going to be tasked with keeping track of volunteer hours. If someone is physically unable to work, perhaps they can process membership applications or do other administrative tasks. If not, they're going to need to find a family member or a friend to perform their community volunteer hours. And let's face it, if they're well enough to garden, they should be capable of contributing in some way. So consider reserving a few plots within the community garden that will be reduced price or free for those who can't afford to pay full price. Determine ahead of time how many free or reduced price plots you want, because you're going to have to factor that in. Everybody else may have to pay a couple extra dollars a year in order to provide those free and reduced price plots. And always, people don't always tell the truth, we know that. So you need to verify their income by, reviewing their tax returns. And kind of don't have those plots say, hey, this one's a free plot or this one's a reduced price. Let's protect their privacy. It's nobody's business. And in exchange for a free or reduced price plot, maybe a few extra volunteer hours should be required. Just remember that they might also be working more than one job. So kind of make those extra duties reasonable. All right. A good policy to include in your bylaws is that everyone must agree to use organic pesticides, herbicides, and fungicides. Nothing would be worse than someone spraying their crops with some nasty chemicals that could float over to the next person's crops, or if they stop gardening, the next person is left with contaminated Mel's mix. So if your organization is going to provide the Mel's mix for everyone and they don't follow this particular rule, it should be specified in those bylaws that they have to pay to have that Mel's mix replaced for every raised bed in their plot, because we don't know if they just used it on one thing, maybe a localized pest problem, or if they sprayed it on everything, and you just can't take that chance. So make sure to get written or virtual signatures that everyone has read, understood, and agreed to follow the rules. And that anyone else that they might have working, maybe they're going to bring their kids or a friend to help them, make sure that those people are also told what the rules are. So I jumped ahead a bit with that last section, so I'm going to go back and get us back on track. You've got your board, you've got your location, you've got your funding, and you've got your bylaws. Now you're ready to start planning the configuration of that community garden. Even if you're given a large plot of land, a large piece of land, my suggestion, again, is to start out modestly with a small number of plots, but you need to be ready for quick growth, because we find time and again that once someone gets a hold of that community garden and starts telling their friends, it kind of does shoot I don't know, wildfire. But the best thing to do is to continually walk that property and think about where everything is going to go. And you're going to have to figure out what you want to provide to your members and where it will logically grow. Check out the orientation of the land. There's north. You're going to need to know where north is at all times. Figure out how and where the raised beds should be placed, and take into consideration any tree growth or structures that are going to cast shadows on the garden. And the shady areas are actually going to be good to put benches or picnic tables or a nice shady spot for someone to get out of that sun and rest. So consider your marketing strategy for getting gardeners to rent the plots. They're going to want to know in writing what they're going to get for their fee. Are you going to be providing a water spigot? I mean, do you even have the ability to provide water? The county might help you. There's different organizations that might give you grants to start your community garden. So don't overlook those. If you cannot get water, let's see, county or well water to your site, then you're really going to have to prepare to have large tanks on site with water available to the renters, because they're not going to want to drag buckets of or jugs of water to the site. Will there be porta potties available? You know, that's a real consideration. Are you going to, again, do that shady area for picnic tables and gatherings? Hey, nothing is better than maybe at the end of season, if you're going to have a fall cleanup, how about a nice community meal together? You have to make sure that there's adequate parking and that you have a weatherproof notice board for meeting flyers, notices, and also to keep a copy of the community garden rules. Are you going to provide a section of tabletop beds for those who can't bend or who use a wheelchair? I'm going to have you right now take a note of those vertical structures there. And those would be great for you to use as trellises for the tabletop raised beds. So keep that in mind if people would like to grow vertically. So try to accommodate for a dedicated area that's close to the parking lot as possible and close to the community garden entrance. And that would be the logical site to have that section. Consider hard surfaces and ample turnaround for a wheelchair. You know, follow your local guidelines. So in most locations, of course, you're going to need to fence in the area to stop both two-legged and four-legged critters or intruders. Especially when you're new or things are starting to come to harvest, ask law enforcement to swing by regularly. So you're going to want to offer various sized plots based on the different members' needs. Obviously, a single person or a young couple without children will need less space than a family with 4 children. If you want to instead make sure that all the plots are the same size, then perhaps allow members with larger families to rent 2 or 3 plots. Now, we talked earlier about 4 feet by 4 feet raised beds. And when we do that, if you have 2 raised beds, we'd like you to have 3-foot aisle space. So maybe instead of doing 4 by 4 raised beds, you're going to give them a 4 by 8. And then that way, you don't have that wasted space of that 3-foot aisle. So that's usually my suggestion, is 4 by 8 raised beds. And there again, the 2 sides that are 4 feet, that's 1 board cut in half. And then you don't even have to cut the 2 8-foot lengths. And then between the separate plots, you're going to have some space there. And if you don't have individual plots fenced, and that should be the members doing that, not the community garden. And you should have enough space for 3-foot aisle, a fence, and another 3-foot aisle for the other member to share, so that they're not running into each other if they don't have a fence. So if possible, you're going to want to take and orient the long side of the raised bed to the north, so that people can use that north side to grow vining crops vertically. That will save them so much space. And you can grow any vining veggies. The reason for it to be on the north side is so that it does not cast a shadow on the neighbor's plot, their raised bed. So if you do get a grant and can swing it financially, see if you can get a scout organization or a civic organization to lend you some manpower to construct raised beds. And the best way to do it, if you can, is to make bulk quantities of Mel's mix. That way people have no excuse not to do it properly. So keep money reserved, to repair raised beds. If you're using wood, of course, eventually they're going to deteriorate. The reason we talked about galvanized screws in that raised bed, because if one board fails, you can back out the screws, put in a fresh board, and screw them back in. So that's going to help save time rather than having to replace a whole raised bed. So that money would also be to help provide fresh Mel's mix as needed. After a few seasons, it's going to drop an inch or two. So you're going to need to constantly, like every few years, put more Mel's mix into that bed. Maybe you're going to set aside funds in case the water spigot breaks or there's some other kind of emergency. Now, my suggestion is to have at least two member meetings per year so that members can vote on changes. Consider having a speaker there to teach different aspects of gardening, like vertical or planning for maximum use or fall gardening. Many times your county extension service will provide speakers for free. Most freelance speakers, like me, we charge a fee because this is our business and we deserve to be paid. So in the spring, a great thing to have is, how about a seed swap or a plant exchange? And they're great fun activities to have at these meetings. People can also bring their used garden tools, extra seed catalogs, or extra, unwanted garden books there to give away. Consider a private Facebook group where your members can gather and share info. And it's also a great place to have announcements. And if you have a social media page, make sure your administrators monitor continuously for inappropriate activities. Don't allow someone to come in and try to advertise their business and sell the members things. If someone stops renting a plot, make sure that they give their key back, or if it's a cipher lock, change the combination and get them off of your Facebook page continually. And don't make this the only line of communication. Remember that some older folks might not be computer savvy. Well, I hope that you found this information helpful and that you'll make use of that resource page. And thanks so much for listening to me. In just a second, we're going to have the Q&A session. And I just wanted to remind you that I am here representing the foundation. And yeah, that's it. We do have some information for you. You go to our official Facebook page, Square Foot Gardening Foundation. Please use the word foundation on the end of it or you're going to get the wrong page. All right, over to you.
Great. Thank you, Kim, very much. Now, we don't have a lot of time left, but we'd like to get through as many questions as we can quickly. So lots of new people there are lots of new people to the square foot gardening method, and they registered for this webinar, and they asked what are the best ways to get started? How do they decide or know what vegetables and fruits to plant in their area?
Okay, so of course the very best way to get started is to read that 3rd edition book. And if you're in the States, knowing your USDA hardiness zone, United States Department of Agriculture hardiness zone, is key to knowing what you can plant in your area. Just Google hardiness zone by zip code. Those outside the state, There is on the USDA map on one side, there is a key where you can find out Celsius and Fahrenheit markings. So you can find something that's close to what would work for you. And I know someone was talking about hot and dry climates. If you're going to have a hot and dry climate, live in a place like Texas, make your raised bed 2 inches deeper. Maybe put some drip irrigation down and then a couple of inches of mulch. If you have a short growing season, you can use a dome, which is 2 pieces of PVC pipe, diagonal corner to diagonal corner. The second piece, the other diagonal corner, and put a zip tie on the top, and you can cover it with a lot of cloths. If, you could use shade cloth if it's sunny. You could use row covering if it's cold. If it's really cold, you can put 6 mil plastic over it. In harsh climates, I mean, really, we've had people grow all the way up into Nova Scotia using square foot gardening, and some also go year round. So there is an official square foot gardening forum. I don't know if you guys have that link onto the chat. But
it's on the resource sheet as well.
Okay, it'll be on the resource sheet. That's perfect. We have regional forums on there where you can go and find where you live and talk to other people that will know specifically about square foot gardening in your particular area.
Great. There are also many questions about pest control. How do you recommend people keep animals from eating plants?
Okay, well, the 3rd edition book has several recommendations and a couple of recipes for organic pest sprays. And what I personally like to do is I put all of my crops that do not need pollinators in the same raised bed. And that would be your lettuces, greens, root crops, and cabbage family. That means I can put netting over that single raised bed, and I don't have those little moths laying their eggs, which of course produce hungry caterpillars that eat their crops. So that's probably the best way to do it. Also, for other types of critters, in the book we show you how to make a critter cage that will keep most pests out.
All right, so I have a 2-part question here. The first part is, can you create a square foot garden indoors? And the second one is, can you create a square foot garden on a back deck or balcony?
Okay, so I'm going to say no on the indoors because it just, I mean, you can have little containers with Mel's Mix indoors, certainly, but I would not say, I don't know how you would get a 4 foot by 4 foot raised bed in your house to do that. And the other one, I did cover that in the presentation. Yes, by putting the bottom on the raised bed, a lot of drainage holes, and putting it up, you can certainly do that on a balcony or a rooftop. And again, I got to warn you, you absolutely must get a structural engineer in there to make sure that the weight is going to be sustainable by your structure.
Great. How can you grow a garden with little to no shade if there is a full sunshine, or if the backyard is in full sunshine all day?
Okay, so that dome I was talking about, that can be covered with shade cloth and you'll be able to use that. Other people have constructed a shade sail, which is that like triangular structure over their raised beds. And yeah, it's very easy to do. Shade cloth comes in different grades from like, I think 35% shade reduction to 85%.
Okay, and Tim would like to know what a reasonable dollar amount you would estimate per person for a plot in a community garden, including needing to get tools and water for part of the fee.
With square foot gardening, you don't even really need tools. The tools we use are a trowel, a pair of children's scissors, and a pencil. So that's not, I don't I really don't have an answer for that because it's going to be wildly different between New York City and Wyoming. I think that's where you could go to look at the bylaws of other places and see how much they charge.
Okay, and our next question here is when will you be offering the square foot gardening certification program?
That's a good question. So the Square Foot Gardening Foundation is working very hard on updating the certification program, the Certified Instructor program. They've run into a few glitches, and frankly, they would rather roll out a great product rather than have to keep fixing a not so great one. So there, I guess on the resource list, we have a link of where you can put your name on the list to be notified when it's ready.
And this might be the last question. What are good combinations of plants that help support each other grow and resist disease?
Okay, so what you're talking about is companion planting, and there's still a debate whether or not it works. I think it does. So really, it's kind of funny that probably the best resource I found is on Wikipedia. You can use their search to find companion planting. Then you go down to their resources and there's one that says a chart, and then that's where you can find a chart. It's probably the most comprehensive chart I've ever seen on companion planting.
Great. Okay, unfortunately, I think we're out of time for more questions, but thank you, Kim, for that great presentation and for answering the questions we did get to. Quickly, before we sign off, I want to let you all know about our Get Growing initiative. PlantPure Communities and the Square Foot Gardening Foundation are encouraging everyone to get growing this spring. Create your own square foot garden, take photos, and share them with us via social media or email. Both organizations will be featuring your square foot garden photos on our Facebook pages to encourage others to get growing. Also, if you are a group leader or a member of a pod, we encourage you to check out the Square Foot Gardening Foundation's locator map, which lists where their certified instructors are around the world. Get in touch with a local square foot gardening expert and arrange a workshop, presentation, or community gardening opportunity with your pod. And we will post the links to both of those opportunities in the chat. So thank you. And please, yes, send us your gardening photos.
Yeah, and in addition to participating in the Grit Growing initiative, we hope you'll continue to engage with PlantPure Communities and with the Square Foot Gardening Foundation. With PlantPure Communities, you can follow us on Facebook and Instagram and subscribe to our email list to hear about our latest news and get announcements about upcoming webinars. Anybody and everyone, as we said before, is welcome to join or start a pod. You can find out if there's already a pod in your community by visiting our website. And while you're there, check out the great resources such as the gardening toolkit, and consider making a donation to PlantPure Communities to support the work we're doing. Thanks again to Kim for her participation in this webinar, to my coworkers Ella and Jesse, and to everyone who joined us today. We wish you all the best with your gardening endeavors and look forward to seeing what's to come, what you get a photograph of. Any news from you about your gardening is appreciated and we enjoy hearing it. Thanks so much.
Bye. Thanks, everyone.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks, Kim. Bye.